Welcome back to the Margin Equation. I'm Kara Brown, CEO of Lead Coverage, and your host with Matt Cartwright here, CEO of Magnus Technologies. Matt, tell us a little bit about Magnus.
Sure. So Magnus is a SaaS-based application, highly interoperable with all the systems that are required for the full ecosystem, and really is designed to be capable of handling the full order life cycle for our customers, kind of from quote to cash, every aspect of their business in a single platform.
And these are really specifically for carriers and brokers.
For sure. Yeah, yeah. So most of our customers are going to be asset based, though we handle brokerage as well, as many of our customers do both.
So you have a really specific and interesting perspective on lane-based pricing and why you just don't think it's the right model for most of your clients. Can you give me a little bit on your lane-based pricing perspective?
Yeah. So kind of the whole idea of a lane to me is a little bit misconstrued. It used to be like an A to B, B back to A, and that's a bit of a antiquated perspective, right? So how many times did I go from there to there and back to there? And the truth is, that's just not how the industry works. It really works kind of what we call more like circuits, where I have an A to B, B to C, C to D, and I have a kind of a multi-point route that really needs to be contemplated when I'm doing RFPs, when I'm doing spot pricing, those kinds of things. How are my assets going to move through really the network versus back and forth in a lane? And how am I going to price that to contemplate how full are my trucks, trailers going to be throughout the evolution of them moving through the real network versus moving back and forth from a lane.
So you talked before about this kind of network or circuit planning.
Yep.
How is it different than lane-based planning? Like, what are some of the operational differences between a carrier who is doing circuit or network planning and someone who's a little bit stuck in the A to B lane planning world?
Yeah. So the reality is, operationally, most people don't have the option of lane A to B. That's kind of a vestigial consideration of how they think about it. And often it's a little bit of the industry saying, from this origin, you're going to go to this destination. And there's an assumption that, okay, now I'm just going to come back and pick up my next piece of freight, or I'm going to find freight out of that destination to get me back to there. The truth is, you have really more of a collection of lanes, if you will, that fill out your network, and freight density within your network is way more critical than just a lane. But you have to be aware of, how do my lanes link together to create a profitable circuit? So how long are trucks, trailers, drivers going to be out in this network? How often am I going to have empty miles versus uh, paid freight miles along those lines? And it's not as simple as an A to B, B to A. And so there's a multitude of factors that people need to contemplate. And I think it can be difficult for people to think in those terms, especially when you're thinking about pricing or this specific load or whatever the case is. So
Is it is it imperative that these carriers change the way that they plan? I mean, it's 2026. Technology is coming fast every day, all day, right? Is it a business imperative that this sort of thinking change long term? Like, are you seeing it as something that carriers really need to get a handle on?
yeah, yeah, I think it is. We all know that you don't get paid to ship air.
Yeah.
And just a baseline assumption or an acceptance of the industry is 30% deadhead or whatever the case is. It's just not sufficient for how we should approach the business. There is a complexity that most of the carriers don't have the tools to be able to understand what do their circuits look like in real time,
Mm.
what are the seasonal nuances associated with it, and those kind of things. But I think it's critical that people have to. They'll often understand that these circuits exist. The challenge is how do they understand them and visualize them and take advantage of their data to have empirical knowledge of what their circuits are. But I think it's absolutely critical to continue to make operational improvement that takes advantage of the notion that lanes are pretty antiquated in concept and they don't give you the ability to maximize your laden revenue per mile.
And when you say latent revenue per mile, you're including in that deadhead miles, right? You're including in the circuit the opportunity that is just within a normal cost of doing business as a carrier, which is deadheaded miles.
Yeah, I mean, so your laden miles are how much of the time in the circuit do I have freight, right? So yeah, when you contemplate your total efficiency, it's both laden and unladen. So how does it work within my freight network, within how I'm pursuing additional contract freight, spot buys, those kinds of things that go into there. Driver satisfaction, right? Asset utilization, all the things that come into play. It's really kind of a holistic approach to how do I think about what my trucks, drivers, trailers, what are they doing every day? They're not going A to B primarily. It's a bit antiquated. They're really going a little bit further, whether it's going home, whether it's doing fuel or taking their truck to maintenance, those kinds of things. It's a multi-stop consideration. You think about your Google Maps, right? And you say, hey, I want to find a fuel stop along this route. It doesn't just say, well, hey, it has to be perfect. It can deviate slightly, but it contemplates all that. And that's kind of how they have to think about that as well, is how do I contemplate the entire running miles and maximize my laden or paid miles?
And you've talked about this before, the miles that aren't just the shipment, right? Like
Mhm.
that also has an impact to the carrier.
Sure.
And not really understanding the total cost to serve your customer because maybe you didn't have to stop for gas or you, I don't know, got lost. Like, I don't know why you would get lost in 2026, but it
Yeah.
used to
Yeah,
happen,
yeah,
right? We
yeah,
used to sit
yeah,
on the phone with drivers and get them to the DC, right? And
yeah,
so there are things that come up that are beyond just the point to point.
yeah.
And the old way of kind of doing it and thinking about it doesn't take into account all of the costs to serve the customer. And so are you finding that when a carrier gets access to all this data in one place that it helps them make better decisions?
For sure. So I think there's some old ideas of, hey, if I get $6 revenue per mile, that's great.
Yeah.
The first stratification is it a long haul or short, right?
Yep.
And then the other big question is, how do I get my assets to pick up that freight? And once they deliver it, what am I going to do with them then? So headline number, $6 per laden mile may be great. The underlying story, though, is you got to get somebody there to pick it up. And then what do you do when you deliver it? And I think those kind of pieces often get lost. So with us being able to draw better circles and highlight information of you don't naturally get to this origin, but you may naturally get to this destination. So you've developed your network to service that. So $6 maybe great, right? Sometimes though it's the opposite. $3 per mile may be great because you're running that same geography, typically unloaded or empty, right? So there's a number of factors that our customers now can use to understand what does it take to get the asset to the origin, and then when it finishes, what are they going to do afterwards? So I think the old consideration, this kind of goes back to lane from A to B. There's
Mhm.
some headline numbers that people can consider, but it's really kind of how is that across full time continuum, how am I making sure that those assets are making money the entire time, not on this single shipment? Just because there's a precursor and there's an after that most people have a hard time really understanding.
So, one of the ways to solve that problem, right, must be just the volume of data that a carrier has, either in a legacy TMS or in Magnus, et cetera, and applying a mathematical model,
Yeah,
otherwise known as AI, right? And
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
let you
yeah.
give us your
Sure,
difference between
sure.
is it just math? Is it machine learning? Like, you must be using advanced algorithms to pull this density together and then give this information back to a Magnus customer. That I mean, I'm making a big assumption
Yeah,
here,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I hope you can share with us like the way that Magnus is doing it for
Yeah,
carriers.
yeah. So I think the biggest thing that we do is we actually, using math, plot the geography really. So probably the easiest way to explain it is, person one says, "Hey, it's Chicago area." Person two says, "Yeah, I understand Chicago area." Person three says, "Yeah, I understand Chicago area." The problem is in their mind, one person may be saying Chicago city limits, one person's got a little spike out this way, and the other person, drags it all the way to Indiana.
As a Chicagoan myself, Aurora is not Chicago.
Well,
So,
see, there
yeah,
you go, right?
exactly.
So for us, we take all of the actual shipments, which are actually a point in the world, and we dynamically generate what Chicago really is to you.
Mm.
It may be that most of your shipments are in Evanston, right? Well, if you've cordoned that off and somebody says, "Hey, can you get freight out of Chicago?" If you don't really think about what's the reality of what this label on this geography means, it's hard for you to really share across multiple people what's the impact of that. So our systems are going through and geocoding all of the actual shipments and building the heat maps dynamically, not based on, I've been doing this for 30 years and this is how I think about Chicago. This is really empirical heat map of what, if you want to call it Chicago, that's fine. What does Chicago really mean? It may be, kind of a big star looking shape, but you've got density there that we can prove empirically versus just this is how you think about Chicago. So, and that's a hard thing to do, especially dynamically. And that's why we're using AI tools as well as machine learning and math to overlay those things together. The other big thing about geography is it's different if it's an origin
Mm.
and different if it's a destination. How many times you operate in an area is an insufficient question. You have to know how many times am I picking up freight versus how many times am I delivering freight in those geographies, right? And then, of course, you've got time in there and seasonality considerations. So I think those things for the human mind become almost impossible to
Mm.
manage all those variables, which is why our solutions are dynamically doing it off of real data with kind of empirical evidence-based solutions so that when we say Chicago, do you mean when you're picking up freight there or freight's originating there or when you're delivering? So they can be totally different answers, even though the geography is similar.
Have you seen this materially change someone's business? I would imagine, I grew up on the floor of a brokerage. There was a guy three, seats down from me who could give you the rate per mile, like an encyclopedia, right? And these
Yeah.
guys still exist, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And I would imagine that a new customer coming on Magnus, they've, maybe they're coming from a legacy TMS, maybe they've been using spreadsheets for a long
Yep,
time, or maybe the guy who has the rates in his head just finally retired
yep,
and they're moving to a real data-based decision-making
yep.
process. Has it, like, materially changed some businesses? That must be an incredible feeling to
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
getting a little feelings here on you,
Yeah,
Matt,
yeah.
but just,
No,
like, having the opportunity to, like, really change someone's business and like, "Hey, mathematically, this is where you have density. I know you think it might be in Aurora, but it's actually in Evanston, and those are 2 very different places." That must be really I don't know, impactful for you?
Yeah, it is. I think the hardest part is people being willing to almost reject their
Mm,
existing reality and go, hey, I'm not saying you're wrong or right. I'm just saying here's exactly what the data show. And so your idea, not wrong, but it's not always perfectly supported. And then the other challenge is you got the second person, third person. So if they're coming from a true consideration that's data based, it's a lot easier. So the old idea of what's the revenue per mile from here to here. Well, the one big one that I see is, oh, the city is Evanston, so it doesn't get the rate per mile if it's Chicago to Kansas City. Well, the truth is, based on your actual freight patterns, Evanston actually super easy to service, so it should get the rate here. Or it may be that, yeah, it's generally close, but you've got to move assets 30 miles away. It's really difficult. You don't have density truly in that area, so you need to increase your revenue per mile. And I think the other thing is just kind of people being willing to accept the data is just the data. It's not my opinion. It's not your opinion. And it's not a slight on your opinion. You're directionally correct, but I'm going to give you 3, 4, 5% change that results in a 3, 4, 5, 10, 12% change in your
mm,
economics. And in our world, even 1, 2% is huge, right? We're generally thin margin. Nobody's handing us a bunch of money, right?
mm.
So getting a 1, 2, 3% change just with a slight willingness to contemplate the data actually is the data is a big win for them. But it is a challenge, right? You almost have to reject a little bit of your own reality that you've built up for years, decades, and just go, okay, I'll listen. And that's once they get over that fact and they're willing to listen, it becomes pretty self-evident, like, gosh, I never really thought about that, right? And part of it was there weren't tools in the
Mm.
past to really materialize what was the reality. It was my brain still rules, right? Now we've got, AI and other models that go in and say, I don't need to necessarily rely only on your knowledge. I rely on the data. And then I want to make sure those are complementary of each other, right?
I can imagine there's someone listening to this podcast or watching this webinar who is thinking what you just said, right? I've been doing this for 30 years.
Sure.
No AI model can tell me better than I know my business, my space, my customers, right? You and I have both experienced this.
Yep.
Is there a moment where it clicks? Is there, in your experience, as you're implementing new customers, as you're exposing business owners to new forms of data, and have you seen it change lately?
Um, I don't know that there's any single moment that's the aha moment. And I think it's because you have a lot of your knowledge and realities that it's not one thing where you go, oh, okay, now I'm a full believer. It's kind of an evolutionary
Mm.
consideration where they go, okay, yeah, I can take this, take this, take this, and yeah, this is getting better and better and better. So it's kind of a building of knowledge and trust in the system that it actually is doing things smartly
Okay.
versus just a one moment where I go, oh, okay, I'm going to have total faith in the technology, which I think is important. You always need to be mindful that your experience, your knowledge is highly valuable, right? We're trying to augment that, not just fully replace it.
Mm,
Over time, the augmentation of your model just gets better.
mm,
It's not wrong. You definitely know what you're doing. You definitely understand the industry. All we're saying is we can take in a lot more variables
mm,
because our AI or ML or just computers' capacity to take in the other 70 variables
mhm.
is more significant than any one person.
Hmm.
So it is really kind of an evolutionary versus a revolutionary consideration. And so I think it takes kind of tearing down some of those walls in individual capacity of this is slightly better now, this is slightly better now, this is slightly better, and over time building that trust with them.
You're still we call it human in the loop,
Yep.
right? The idea that I really like this idea that, hey, the data is there, the data is correct,
Yep.
right? Like directionally. I like the idea of directionally correct. What's your advice maybe to business owners that are thinking about, as a business owner myself, there's like this cloud of AI coming for me, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And how I invest, I am sure that your carrier and broker customers and prospects are thinking deeply about where am I going to invest, and I don't want to give up the control to
Yep.
the machine.
Yep.
What is your kind of advice as you've been going through this, and you're really a technologist at heart, you Matt, on where the human in the loop needs to stay, where the human component is still really important as you integrate and invest in these new tools like Magnus?
Yeah. So I think the most significant is the human's going to handle exceptions way better, right?
Okay.
There's a lot of things that we can automate. And sure, a fully autonomous scenario would be, you know, great. But the reality is that's way down the line, if ever. So I think, when we think about how we approach it and how they need to think about it, number one, just be willing to be critical of your own process. Don't even conflate it with technology or whatever the case is. Why do you do this? Why does this process exist? All those things, right? When you start to look at that. And then for the technology part, when we say we want to automate this, we want to assimilate this into this path, don't be defensive simply because this is how you've done it. Be willing to go, hey, does it create value? And that's kind of our perspective too, is we're going to question everything you do, not because it's right or wrong. It's because we want to understand, is there value, number one, and number two, is there opportunity to take cost out, right? So I think the first thing is they have to be willing to go, we're okay with questioning things, right? Not with a right or wrong, just question why do we do and how does it create value? And so I think for them that's going to be the big consideration that we look at, and then from there being able to then sensitize just to exception management. What do they say, that 20% of the
Mhm.
problems is 80% of your
Yeah.
effort. So how do I go, okay, one, I can get that down to 10% problems and now 90% of your effort, because those small tweaks that humans still have the capacity to really solve in a unique manner, and those exceptions require that uniqueness, are where the value really gets high for them. And if I can take a lot of the kind of drudgery and other things out of their workflow through some of our automation and AI tools, then they can really focus on how can I deliver high value in the exceptional situations, and that's their primary intent.
It's interesting. We at Lead Coverage talk to a lot of carriers and brokers all the time, and a lot of them talk about service
Mhm.
as a differentiating factor. And I hadn't connected the dots until you just said that. But if you have 90% of your effort on 10% of the loads that are problem loads,
Yep.
imagine how I shouldn't say that. Imagine how well you can service those exceptions, which
Yep.
is really what service is all about,
For sure.
right?
For
You
sure.
don't need to have a human being tracking every load from Chicago to Arkansas. Like
Yep.
it's going to go, right?
Yep.
But the exceptions are where, and so if you had 90% of your firepower on the 10% of the
Yep.
loads that are a problem,
Yep.
how you could just absolutely create raving fans out
For
of
sure.
customers.
For sure. Your customers are happy. You're finding things
Yeah.
before they become a problem. You're handling before you just go, well, I'm going to accept a service failure. But I'll tell you, one of the things that we find is people will focus on the 90% and be like, hey, I want to look at all these loads, that are, within my appointment windows. And I go, the general assumption is you're going to hit that. And if you're not, we should be able to surface that automatically versus you just going, okay, I want to look at these, look at these, look at these. So they have a natural tendency to look at that 90% that's happening. I think there is a little bit of human nature in that you want to see the positive versus just look at the negative,
Just
right?
show me where I'm
Just,
great.
yeah. So you go, okay, I feel good about having green, right? Yeah, I've got some
Yeah.
red, but I get that kind of reaffirmation of my green too,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And I go, okay, well, let's put a big green over here, but don't look at any of it, right?
Right.
We'll just give you that and make you feel good. And here's really your work cue, and you can make a difference in these from red back to green, right? And so there is a challenge where I think people believing these are the exceptions or the impending exceptions, and shifting from, I do stuff right 90% of the time. Why do I need to continue to monitor my 90% effort? I don't. I just need to accept that and then trust that I can spend my time on what can I get back to green and what can I not get back to green but handle better,
Hmm.
right? To maybe get it back to a yellow or at least manage expectations of customers. Most of their customers they're okay if the expectations are correct. If you fail and fail and fail and you never reached out ahead of time, it's a problem, right? So I think just shifting that mindset into realizing that most people do things right most of the time and let that go, right? It doesn't need to be in your work stream. Here's the areas where if you could spend all of your time, you would make a significantly higher impact, both financially and, in service, expectations, those things.
It's a little bit of, you've been talking a lot about kind of change management.
Yeah,
Thinking that way is a hard way to think,
it is.
right? As a
It is.
leader, like,
Yeah.
hey, we're doing great. I don't need to pay attention to the good stuff. Just give me the hard stuff,
Yep.
right? I think it was
Yep.
Elon Musk who said, being an entrepreneur is like chewing glass. Like he
Yeah.
only gets the
Yep.
worst
Yeah, yeah, for
problems,
sure.
right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and
It's
if
I
all
mean,
you're doing is focusing
yep.
on the 10% that's
It's hard.
broken, it can feel like you're not doing anything
It's
right.
hard. Yeah,
But I think
yeah.
that's really good advice.
Yeah, yeah. And
So
it's hard to give that up, right? You need that affirmation sometimes,
yeah.
but the reality is your impact is really on making improvements.
Yeah, and you've talked a lot about value in our time together, and I think the value you can drive is by turning those 10 or 20% of exceptions into raving fans.
For sure.
So
For sure.
this was such a good conversation. We started at the beginning of our chat talking about lane versus circuit planning. We went sort of a different
Yeah,
direction, but
yeah.
I don't hate it.
Yeah.
Can you connect it all back for me? Can you connect the change in mindset from lane planning to circuit planning to thinking about it from a data perspective and then change management in the business?
Yeah. Yeah, so, it kind of all hinges on the idea of we have our realities of what the world is, right? And lanes is a great one. I hear people say, "Hey, I have a lane imbalance. I have this, this, and this," and I'm like, "Man, I need you to abandon that idea, but I'm not rejecting your reality. I've got to do something different," all the way to what we're kind of talking about of exception management. So if you think about lanes, it's just a great illustration of these are generally accepted ideas, terms, industry things. And we're just saying, hey, let's look at them slightly differently. And that kind of goes throughout the business, right? How do we look at things just slightly differently so that we can turn the knob here just a little bit more to improve our yield, our profitability, our asset utilization, our driver satisfaction, our customer satisfaction, those kinds of things. And so lanes kind of is a good indicator of this makes sense to most people when you say it. And then as you start to shift over to it's really circuits, and then origins and destinations have to be handled differently. It's a little bit of an analogy of the entirety of
Mhm.
how we're thinking about, these are the problems in the industry. What are the solutions in the industry? So kind of runs akin to all those things. And lanes is an easy one to illustrate. This is something everybody understands. That's a good jumping off point to think about how do we make it better.
I really appreciate you taking something as simple as lanes and turning it into like a mindset
Yeah,
change.
yeah,
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 that's
right.
really great. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Matt.
Sure.
Will you tell our listeners how to get a hold of Magnus?
For sure. I mean, the easiest way is just go to the site, magnustech.com, reach out, phone number. There's a web form out there. There's a little simple ROI
Hmm.
calculator out there that people can use to kind of look at, what can Magnus do for you to improve your business. But, you know, any of those are there. We're at a lot of the industry conferences. So come up, say hi. Happy to talk to you about any of the business. This is our passion for sure is the industry, not just the software side of it. It really is the industry. So reach out in the website or phone or at one of the shows. Happy to chat any of it
Awesome.
for
Thanks
sure.
for joining me, Matt.
For sure.